Can you believe it? In just a few minutes, an entire major airline will be shaken to its core. A powerful female captain will be handcuffed right in front of the passengers. A rotten system covering up discrimination will be torn apart in broad daylight. And the one who triggers this earthquake is not a politician, is not a reporter, but merely a woman of color wearing a worn-out hoodie, quietly boarding the plane. What those who look down on her don't know is that inside that simple backpack lies a power strong enough to crush injustice. A golden badge bearing the name Sheriff Naomi Carter. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. The morning at Newark International Airport was cloaked in a cold mist, with the faint sunlight struggling to pierce through the thick grey clouds. Passengers poured toward the gates in a steady stream, the overlapping announcements from the loudspeakers and the rolling of suitcase wheels echoing into waves of noise. Amid the sea of people, Naomi Carter stood still, no longer adorned in her commanding uniform, no longer bearing the gleaming silver star on her chest, no longer receiving the respectful gazes that always followed her whenever she entered any room. Today, Naomi was just an ordinary woman of color, wearing a baggy ash-gray hoodie, faded jeans, worn-out sneakers, and a scuffed leather backpack slung over her shoulder. She tightened her grip on the backpack strap, feeling the rough, weathered leather under fingers hardened by years of serving justice. One day, Naomi reminded herself, breathing in the biting cold air, just one day as an anonymous passenger among the crowd, one day without commands, without authority. Inside the inner pocket of her hoodie, the golden badge of the Metropolitan City Sheriff lay quietly, cold and heavy, a silent reminder: power can be stripped away, but true nature never can. Naomi began to walk slowly. Every step, every breath was a conscious effort to live out her role for the day, an ordinary woman of color, with no privileges, no voice. No one among the hurried travelers around her noticed that this simple woman held in her hands a power that could make the entire system tremble if she so wished. They didn't know, but they were about to. As Naomi Carter quietly melted into the sea of people elsewhere in a shadowed corner of Newark Airport, a dark plan was already being set into motion, and Naomi had no idea that she was about to become its target. Inside the crew briefing room of Sovereign Airlines, the air was thick with an uncomfortable secrecy. Captain Morgan Caldwell, the airline's veteran pilot, leaned against the briefing table, her uniform crisp, her gaze sharp as a blade. Beside her stood Jessica Monroe, the lead flight attendant for today's flight, bending in to listen, her face wearing a polite smile but her eyes gleaming with calculation. "Standards are slipping," Caldwell muttered, her voice low and venomous. "Nowadays, anyone can sit in first class. They're destroying our standards," Jessica chimed in, her half-smile laced with disdain. Caldwell adjusted the pilot's cap in her hand, then glanced down at the passenger manifest. "Those who don't belong here need to be reminded," she hissed under her breath. Jessica let out a dry chuckle and gave a knowing nod. Both women were all too familiar with the so-called preservation of standards, a euphemism for the systematic discrimination they upheld. No one else in the room spoke up. The young pilots, the newly hired flight attendants, they merely exchanged glances, knowing full well that speaking out would mean being pushed out of the airline's elite crews. On the wall, the polished logo of Sovereign Airlines reflected the figures plotting in the room. Today, Flight SA-1143 from Newark to Chicago, which should have been just another routine journey. Under the hands of Morgan Caldwell and Jessica Monroe, it was set to become a calculated hunt, a cruel display of dominance, and Naomi Carter, unaware, was walking straight into the trap they had laid. Naomi Carter's footsteps echoed against the cold stone floor of the terminal. She stopped in front of a young Latino family, a father, a mother, and 3 small children, struggling before the directional signs. Their faces were filled with confusion, their eyes wide with worry. The mother clutched the baby in her arms, glancing anxiously around. The father fumbled through the English words on the sign, beads of sweat gathering on his forehead. Without hesitation, Naomi stepped forward. In a warm, fluent Spanish, she asked, "Can I help you?" The mother's eyes lit up, like a lifeline thrown into a storm. Within minutes, Naomi had helped them locate their departure gate, guided them on the right path, and even comforted the tearful children. The father gripped Naomi's hand tightly, his voice thick with gratitude. A small but heartwarming moment amid a cold, indifferent world. But warmth never lasted long. From across the terminal, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Hey you! What are you standing there for? Get that mess off the floor." Naomi turned around. Standing there, authoritative in her Sovereign Airlines uniform, was Captain Morgan Caldwell. Her eyes bore into Naomi as if she were a lowly janitor, a foreign object that needed to be cleared from sight. "I'm not a cleaner," Naomi replied, her voice calm, but Captain Caldwell didn't care to listen. She marched forward, chin lifted. "People like you, always loitering around, getting in the way." The words, "people like you," dropped cold and raw, a knife slashing at dignity. The crowd around them paused, strange, curious, pitying glances, and even a few satisfied smirks. A handful of service staff nearby let out snickers. Naomi straightened her posture, a sharp glint flashing in her eyes. But she didn't respond, because she knew it wasn't time to strike yet. Captain Caldwell shot her one last look of contempt before striding away, her heels pounding the floor like the sound of a sentencing gavel. Naomi drew a deep breath. She turned to the stunned Latino family, offering them a reassuring smile. Then she picked up her backpack and walked on. The storm lay ahead, and this time Naomi was ready. Naomi Carter slung her backpack over her shoulder and crossed the grand concourse, heading toward the security checkpoint. Before her, the flow of people moved like small rivers converging into ticket gates, swift, efficient, indifferent. A white man in an Armani suit stepped into the priority lane. The TSA agent nodded in greeting, waving him through with barely a glance. An elderly couple, both with silver hair, were welcomed with a friendly smile, no further checks. A young blonde woman, clutching a laptop, simply flashed her boarding pass and was waved right through. Naomi took a deep breath and quietly stepped forward. Just as she set foot into the checkpoint, a cold male voice rang out, "Ma'am, step aside for random screening." Random. Here it was again. Random. Naomi turned her head. The officer who had called her was named Marcus Allen, his name badge pinned neatly on his chest. Unlike the hostility she had encountered before, Marcus's eyes held only exhaustion, as if he too was weary of enforcing a randomness that wasn't random at all. Naomi said nothing. She placed her backpack on the table and spread her arms out to her sides. The inspection began. Blue-gloved hands rummaged through every pocket of her bag. Every single item, a phone charger, a camera lens, a scarf, was pulled out and examined as if hiding some hidden threat. A bottle of lotion was uncapped. Her worn sneakers were shaken violently, their seams scrutinized. Meanwhile, other passengers, white, well-dressed, breezed through as effortlessly as gusts of wind. Not a single glance was cast at Naomi with fairness. Only suspicion, only wariness. A TSA agent from the expedited screening lane glanced over at Naomi, smirked, and whispered something to a colleague, prompting both of them to chuckle quietly. Naomi heard it. She heard everything, but she stood still. When Marcus finally finished the inspection, he said awkwardly, "You're clear, Mum. Sorry for the inconvenience." Naomi nodded, carefully picking up each of her belongings, now jumbled and wrinkled, and placing them back into her backpack. Not a word of complaint, not a flash of anger, only her eyes, colder than the thick mist outside. And within those eyes, a slow-burning fire had begun to rise. Boarding gate 22B of Sovereign Airlines was packed with people. The boarding announcements echoed over the loudspeakers, blending with the soft hum of chatter and the rolling wheels of suitcases skimming across the plastic floor. At the priority boarding lane, Naomi Carter stood in the first-class line, her electronic ticket ready on her phone. She glanced around and caught the eye of the boarding agent, Natalie Green. A look filled with malice. Naomi stepped forward and presented her ticket. Natalie didn't bother to smile, didn't bother with a good morning, like she had offered to the previous passengers. Instead, she raised an eyebrow slightly. "Boarding pass, please." Naomi handed it over. Natalie stared at the scanner screen as if she had just discovered a deadly threat. She flipped the ticket back and forth, pretending to fumble with the keyboard. The surrounding passengers began to turn their attention toward Naomi. Soft whispers rippled through the air. "What's the problem now?" "Bet it's a fake ticket." "Someone dressed like that in first class." Naomi stood tall, her hand gripping the strap of her backpack. No one had laid a hand on her, but every whisper, every contemptuous glance, were like tiny knives stabbing at her pride. Natalie continued the charade, typing theatrically, "Seems like there's an issue with this boarding pass." Her voice was pitched just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. A middle-aged couple clutching suit jackets shook their heads in disapproval. A young man in a black suit scanned Naomi from head to toe with a sneer. Naomi asked calmly, "May I ask, what issue?" Natalie smirked. "Well, looks like we'll need to verify some information. Please step aside." That was the goal all along. No evidence needed. Just public humiliation, just degradation. Naomi slowly slid her phone back into her pocket, offering no argument, no reaction. She stepped aside. But in her eyes, eyes that had witnessed thousands of acts of discrimination, there was no trace of surprise. Only coldness, sharp and honed, like a blade quietly waiting for its time to strike. Naomi Carter stood silently at the edge of the boarding gate. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there, a quiet figure amid the bustling crowd. But her mere presence, in a faded hoodie, worn-out sneakers, and a face of color, was enough to stir up prying, disdainful glances. Natalie Green continued her inspection, clicking and tapping on the computer, even though the system had already confirmed the ticket as valid at the first scan. The way she dragged out the process, the way her eyes kept darting sideways toward Naomi, it was all part of a clumsy performance that everyone understood. They were trying to turn Naomi into a public spectacle. Passengers lining up behind began to murmur, "Always some trouble. Why do those people always cause issues? We're going to miss our flight. So annoying." Naomi didn't move. She simply rested her hand on her backpack strap, as if anchoring herself against the invisible storm swirling around her. From a distance, Captain Morgan Caldwell approached. Her Sovereign Airlines uniform was immaculate, medals gleaming on her chest. Her eyes swept quickly over Naomi, a look Naomi knew all too well, undisguised contempt. Captain Caldwell leaned down and whispered something to Natalie. Immediately, Natalie picked up the intercom and called for a supervisor. "Gate Supervisor Daniel Foster, please report to Gate 22B. We have a situation requiring assistance." Minutes later, Daniel Foster appeared, a man with a professional demeanor but eyes already betraying fatigue. Natalie gave a hushed report, pretending seriousness. Daniel checked Naomi's ticket. It took him exactly 5 seconds. The screen displayed clearly, "Valid first-class ticket. Checked in early that morning. Platinum member." Daniel glanced up at Naomi, then quickly over at Captain Caldwell, who stood with arms crossed, waiting. He hesitated. One side was the truth. The other side was the pressure of hidden authority. In the end, Daniel sighed. "Miss Carter, you may board." His voice was so low it was almost meant for Naomi alone. But Captain Caldwell wasn't finished. She stepped forward, blocking Naomi's way, pretending to inspect the ticket once more. "First class, huh? Are you sure you didn't book the wrong class?" Her voice dripped with mockery. Naomi replied slowly, "I know exactly what ticket I purchased, ma'am." Some passengers turned to look. Some frowned. Others smirked. Naomi tightened her grip on her backpack strap, feeling her heartbeat steady, just like every time she had faced down armed criminals. After nearly 10 minutes of deliberate delay, Naomi was finally allowed to approach the boarding gate. She walked forward, head held high, eyes proud, refusing to let anyone in that crowd catch even a glimpse of weakness. But she knew the real storm was still waiting ahead. Naomi Carter had just stepped past the checkpoint and entered the jet bridge, the narrow corridor leading directly onto the plane. The air here was colder, gloomier. Her footsteps echoed heavily, each step feeling like a march toward an invisible battlefield. And then, Captain Morgan Caldwell emerged from a side entrance. She positioned herself squarely in the middle of the corridor, her face wearing a fake mask of sternness. "Miss Carter," Captain Caldwell's voice cracked like a whip through the air. Naomi stopped, her gaze calm. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice eerily composed. Captain Caldwell strode closer, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "I've just received a security alert," she growled. "Your bag may contain a suspicious item. You will need to open your backpack for inspection. Right here. Right now." A suspicious item, here, on the jet bridge, in full view of the passengers queuing behind her. Naomi understood immediately. This wasn't security protocol, this was a trap. A calculated attempt to humiliate her publicly. A dirty trap. A meticulously planned public shaming designed to turn her from a rightful passenger into a suspect before a captive audience. She quickly scanned the area. Several passengers had already pulled out their phones, recording discreetly. Whispers started to spread. Naomi took a deep breath, steadying herself, as she had done countless times stepping into rooms full of armed men. "I do not consent to an unlawful search here," Naomi stated clearly. "If there is truly a security concern, I request an official TSA officer to conduct the inspection according to federal procedures." Captain Caldwell hesitated. She hadn't expected Naomi to know the law so well. "I am responsible for the safety of this flight," Caldwell barked. "I have the right to demand an inspection." Naomi's lips curled into a slight cold smile. "You are responsible for the flight's safety, but you do not have the authority to violate federal regulations regarding personal searches without a lawful warrant." The air inside the jet bridge stretched taut, like a wire about to snap. People held their breath. Who was right? Who was wrong? A woman of color, standing her ground against the absolute power of the captain, a sight few had ever dared witness. Captain Caldwell's patience snapped. She lunged forward, reaching for Naomi's backpack, but Naomi immediately stepped back, lifting her phone, camera already recording. "If you touch me or my personal property without a security officer present and without lawful authority, your actions will be recorded as unlawful assault, and I will proceed to file charges against sovereign airlines." The murmurs spread like wildfire. "She's recording. Captain doesn't have that right. She's quoting the law." Several passengers no longer bothered to hide their phones, openly filming the scene. Captain Caldwell clenched her jaw. Her eyes burned with rage, but her hands froze in place, unwilling to risk touching the backpack now. She knew one wrong move, and it would all be captured, irreversible. Naomi stood there, calm and unshakable, like a tower in the heart of a storm. She didn't shout. She didn't wave her arms. Her steady presence and a single phone recording were enough to topple their filthy charade. Finally, Captain Caldwell ground out through gritted teeth, "Board the plane." Naomi gave a slight nod and walked past her, head high, shoulders straight. No fear. Behind her, the jet bridge buzzed with whispers that could no longer be contained, living witnesses to the injustice just exposed. Naomi Carter stepped into the Sovereign Airlines cabin, her footsteps steady, her gaze sweeping across the first-class section. Soft lighting bathed the plush leather seats, and the polite murmurs of the passengers wove a fragile soundscape, as if the entire world here operated under an unwritten rule, luxurious yet coldly distant. Naomi tightened her grip on her backpack, feeling Captain Morgan Caldwell's heavy, unseen gaze trailing behind her like a weight. She found her seat, 2A, the first-class seat she had fully paid for, and sat down. Beside her was a middle-aged businessman, silver-haired and neatly suited. He gave Naomi a brief glance, his expression hesitating slightly before quickly turning away. Not everyone had the courage to look the truth in the eye. Naomi tucked her backpack neatly under the seat in front, fastened her seatbelt, and prepared for the flight. She thought the public humiliation had ended at the jet bridge. She was wrong. Just minutes after settling in, Jessica Monroe, the flight attendant with a plastic-perfect smile, approached. On her tray were glasses of orange juice, water, and wine. But as she reached Naomi's row, Jessica seemed to forget Naomi's existence. She served 2B, offered drinks to 1A and 1B, but deliberately skipped Naomi without even a glance. Ignoring, dismissing, erasing her presence. A classic power play. Naomi pressed the flight attendant call button. The light blinked overhead. Jessica glanced over, walked up, and said in a syrupy tone, "Sorry, we're very busy right now. I'll serve you when I can." And with that, she spun away as if fleeing. Naomi could feel the stares of the other passengers drifting toward her. Some looked on with pity, some with curiosity, and some turned away, as if fearing that merely acknowledging her could infect them with trouble. But Naomi did not lower her head. She opened her phone and began methodically taking notes. The exact time Jessica refused to serve her. The number of times she was ignored. Every tiny jab accumulating into a record. It didn't stop there. Captain Caldwell appeared. She walked down the first-class aisle like a queen inspecting her domain, her cold gaze sweeping over each passenger. When she reached Naomi's seat, she stopped, hands clasped behind her back, staring down at Naomi as if scrutinizing an uninvited stranger. "There seems to be a misunderstanding here," Captain Caldwell declared loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "This flight upholds strict first-class standards. We need to reconfirm passenger information." Naomi looked up. "Then please reconfirm," she replied, her voice calm but every word sharp as steel. A gate supervisor, Daniel Foster, was promptly summoned onto the plane. He arrived carrying a mobile scanner. Naomi handed over her boarding pass. Beep. The screen displayed clearly passenger Naomi Carter. Seat 2A, class first, status platinum member. Daniel Foster hesitated awkwardly. He turned to Captain Caldwell and said, "Everything is perfectly in order, Captain." A heavy silence fell. Captain Caldwell's face stiffened. The evidence was irrefutable, yet she refused to back down. "Sometimes," Caldwell said bitterly, "even if someone buys a ticket, they might not truly belong to the spirit of first class." The spirit of first class. Naomi looked straight into her eyes. "I believe the spirit of first class should begin with respecting passengers, not judging them by the color of their skin." The cabin seemed to freeze. No more murmurs, no more secret camera clicks, only the raw truth, laid bare under the bright lights. A woman of color, armed with power and intelligence, challenging an entire system of prejudice. Naomi allowed herself a small, knowing smile. The real battle had only just begun. The first-class cabin of Sovereign Airlines remained steeped in heavy silence. Every eye, whether sneaky or brazen, turned toward Naomi Carter, the only woman of color in the section. Sitting upright, her gaze calm, Naomi stood firm like a landmark in the midst of the silent storm of prejudice swirling around her. Captain Morgan Caldwell wasn't finished. The rage of being exposed by Naomi in front of the entire cabin had unhinged her. She strode to Naomi's seat, braced both hands on the armrests of 2A, and leaned in, pressing close, attempting to physically intimidate her. "People like you don't belong here." Each word was hissed through gritted teeth, sharp as a blade slicing across cold steel. The entire cabin seemed to freeze. "People like you." There was no need for further explanation. Every passenger instinctively understood what she meant. Skin color, class, prejudice, all packed brutally into one simple, merciless phrase. Naomi looked straight into Captain Caldwell's icy eyes. No fear, no trembling, only a chilling steadiness, so fierce it made even the seasoned captain hesitate for a split second. "I have a valid ticket. I have every right to sit here," Naomi said firmly. "And maybe," she added, voice cutting clean through the tension, "it's you who should question whether you deserve the seat of power you occupy." Her reply rang clear, without shouting, yet loud enough to detonate the atmosphere around her. Some passengers gasped. The man in seat 2B, who had quietly observed until now, turned to Naomi, his eyes full of admiration. A lady in 1C shook her head in disapproval toward Captain Caldwell. Silent support began to spread like sparks in dry grass. But Captain Caldwell, blinded by arrogance, refused to retreat. She straightened, turned to the entire cabin, and announced in a loud voice, "Sovereign Airlines maintains strict standards for our first-class cabin. We protect this premium environment from those who do not fit." Her eyes sliced through Naomi, a public sentencing without need of weapons. A shove without hands, an exile from civility executed purely with words, more vicious than any physical assault. Naomi's hand tightened slightly on the backpack strap under her seat, her eyes flashing with an icy light. She had seen enough, heard enough, recorded enough. If Caldwell thought she could humiliate Naomi on her false throne, she had fatally underestimated her. Naomi calmly pulled out her phone. One tap. The recording app came to life. No more secrecy, no more silent suffering. She filmed everything, openly and with composure, under the astonished gazes of those who once thought themselves untouchable. And in Naomi's heart, a silent vow thundered, "Not just for me, not just today. Justice will be demanded for every soul ever denied, humiliated, or stripped of dignity because of their skin color." The air inside Sovereign Airlines' first-class cabin was so thick it felt like even the molecules were holding their breath. Everyone, passengers and crew alike, teetered on the brink of an explosion they could no longer control. Captain Morgan Caldwell, clad in her immaculate uniform, pilot's cap perched proudly, now had a wild, desperate gleam in her eyes. She was no longer in command. The arrogance and disdain had morphed into a deep, simmering fear, fear of being challenged, exposed, dethroned. Naomi Carter sat still in seat 2A, a statue of steel, her calm gaze locked forward, phone in hand, still recording, a silent indictment. Captain Caldwell hissed through clenched teeth, her voice barely above a growl, "Turn that phone off." Naomi didn't flinch. She stared straight at her, silent, cold. And then the last dam broke. Captain Caldwell lunged. Smack! Her ringed hand, bearing the airline's insignia, struck Naomi across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Everything froze. A wine glass slipped from the hand of the passenger in 2B and shattered on the floor. A little girl in row 3 screamed in terror. The woman in 1C clapped her hand over her mouth in horror. That slap didn't just strike Naomi. It struck every person who had ever believed power could hide ugliness. It shattered the fake mask Sovereign Airlines had so carefully crafted. Naomi didn't cry. She didn't lash out. She didn't scream. She simply, slowly, turned back, her eyes as steady as mountain stone, and, deliberately, drew a badge from inside her coat. A badge heavier than 1,000 pounds. Naomi Carter, Chief of Police, Metropolitan City. Badge number 001. She held the badge out firmly toward Captain Caldwell, her hand unshaking. The entire first-class cabin fell into stunned silence. Several passengers jumped to their feet. A ripple of horrified whispers tore through the air. Chief of Police! Oh my God, she just slapped the Chief of Police. Her career's over, completely over. Captain Caldwell staggered back a step, her eyes locked on the badge, seeing not just a name, but her own doom. From the front of the cabin, Marcus Allen, the airport security officer, having witnessed everything, hurried down the aisle, his voice cutting clear. Captain Morgan Caldwell, you are under arrest for assaulting a senior law enforcement officer and assaulting a passenger on a commercial flight. Marcus produced a pair of handcuffs. Caldwell tried to protest, but her voice cracked, broken. No. I'm the captain. I have authority. But no title could save her now. No uniform could shield her sins. Naomi rose from her seat, strong, unyielding. All around phones were raised, recording. The truth could no longer be silenced. Justice could no longer be smothered with a slap. Marcus stepped forward, snapping the cold metal cuffs onto Captain Caldwell's wrists. Real power, Naomi thought quietly, is not in a cap or a uniform. It's knowing when to stand up and never bowing down. The silence inside Sovereign Airlines' first-class cabin was now so heavy that every heartbeat seemed to echo through the air. In that stillness, the image of Captain Morgan Caldwell, handcuffed, pale-faced, stood as a raw, unvarnished symbol of corrupted power laid bare. Naomi Carter stood tall, her chief of police badge gleaming under the cold cabin lights. She didn't rush. She didn't falter. She simply, slowly, walked toward the front cabin where Jessica Monroe, the flight attendant who had colluded in the attempt to humiliate her, now trembled like a leaf in a storm. Naomi held her head high. Each of her footsteps pounded against the aircraft floor, sending invisible shockwaves through those who had once strutted with arrogance and now crumbled into dust. Marcus Allen, the security officer, stood at the ready, his sharp eyes sweeping the cabin. A voice came over the intercom. All passengers, please remain seated. A security incident is being handled. From the aircraft door, Daniel Foster, the gate supervisor of Sovereign Airlines, rushed up, his face ashen. Upon recognizing Naomi, he froze in place, terror flashing across his features. No one dared speak. No one dared move. Naomi approached, her voice low and razor-sharp. Flight attendant Jessica Monroe, gate agent Natalie Green, supervisor Daniel Foster, surrender your badges and IDs immediately. You will face criminal investigation and immediate termination. Jessica shakily unclipped her name tag. Natalie, face drained of color, fumbled to unpin her employee ID with trembling hands. Daniel stammered in a panic. I was just following orders. Naomi cut him off, her voice cold. When you choose silence in the face of injustice, you choose the side of the oppressor. Patrick Simmons, vice president of Sovereign Airlines, hurried aboard, his face bloodless. He stopped dead at the scene, Captain Caldwell in handcuffs. Jessica, Natalie, and Daniel standing like criminals awaiting judgment. Passengers silently recording with their phones, each clip soon to flood the internet. Patrick bowed his head, whispering to Naomi, We accept all legal consequences. Sovereign Airlines will fully cooperate with the authorities. Naomi gave a slight nod, her eyes never leaving the disgraced employees. A passenger in row 3, live streaming with his phone, murmured, "This is the first time I've witnessed justice blazing right before my eyes." An elderly man seated in row 1 whispered, "She's the one who truly deserves respect." Naomi Carter tightened her grip around her chief of police badge. She knew this moment would become legendary, not just because of a slap, not just because of a downfall, but because today the world witnessed that. Corrupt power can be overthrown when one person dares to rise. The Sovereign Airlines plane had not yet closed its doors. The first-class cabin was stifling, crushed under the weight of 100 tons of unspoken pressure. Captain Morgan Caldwell, once the sovereign ruler of the skies, now shuffled down the narrow aisle in handcuffs, head bowed, flanked by Marcus Allen and another security officer. The clinking of the cuffs rang out with each step, like a hammer pounding on the ruins of her shattered honor. Passengers held their breath, phones were raised high, capturing every second of the most humiliating moment of the once arrogant captain's career. Naomi Carter stood tall nearby, a proud tower amid the storm. Her gaze followed Caldwell, not with revenge, but with the piercing eyes of justice. From the intercom came the announcement, "Flight 1143 to Chicago is temporarily delayed due to a security incident. All passengers, please remain seated and await further instructions." At the aircraft door, Patrick Simmons, Vice President of Sovereign Airlines, had arrived, leading a team of senior managers. In his ear, a headset crackled with the urgent voice of Gregory Stanton, CEO of Sovereign Airlines. "Immediately suspend the entire implicated flight crew. Replace the crew now. Protect the passengers and the company's reputation at all costs." Patrick strode toward the implicated staff. His voice was sharper than ever. Flight attendant Jessica Monroe, gate agent Natalie Green, supervisor Daniel Foster, you are hereby suspended immediately. Surrender your IDs and leave the aircraft at once. Jessica, Natalie, and Daniel, the collaborators in the disgraceful scheme, went pale, silently unpinning their employee badges. The clicks of the badges being unclipped sounded like gavel strikes ringing through the heavy air. A replacement flight crew was swiftly brought aboard. A standby captain, Captain Laura Bennett, was urgently dispatched from the crew lounge. She entered the cabin in total silence, her gaze briefly sweeping over Naomi and the scattered passengers. Patrick Simmons bowed his head slightly before Naomi, his voice low and solemn. "On behalf of Sovereign Airlines, I pledge that those who abused their power today will be held accountable, with no cover-ups, no evasions." Naomi replied quietly, "I don't need promises, I need action." Passengers remained scattered across the cabin, silent. No applause, no cheering, only a heavy, profound stillness and a deep, unspoken respect for the small, resilient woman who stood unwavering. At that very moment, inside the executive boardroom at Sovereign Airlines Manhattan headquarters, CEO Gregory Stanton issued the order. "Hold a press conference tonight. Announce the immediate, indefinite suspension of Captain Caldwell and all involved personnel. Pledge compensation and a complete overhaul." No negotiation, no delay, no concealment. Outside at Gate 37, beyond the aircraft, a wave of media had already begun gathering. News of the incident, a woman of color slapped in the first-class cabin, had spread like wildfire. Major newspapers, social media platforms, television networks all exploded with headlines. Chief Naomi Carter exposes racial discrimination scandal aboard Sovereign Airlines Flight 1143. From that moment, the earthquake began. Not just the fall of a captain, but the collapse of an arrogant system that once thought itself untouchable. 3 days later, the Federal District Court held an emergency hearing regarding the incident aboard Sovereign Airlines Flight 1143. Media outlets crowded the gleaming marble hallways. Journalists, TV reporters, independent bloggers, all waited for one moment: the delivery of justice. At the defendant's stand, Morgan Caldwell, the former captain, sat with her head bowed, stripped of all arrogance, stripped of the pilot's cap once saluted at every boarding gate. Beside her sat a defense attorney, his face heavy with worry. Inside the courtroom, Naomi Carter entered. No uniform, no badge, only a sleek black suit, her posture straight as an arrow, her eyes shining like torches in the dim courtroom. Every gaze turned toward her. Without a word, the entire room rose to their feet, offering Naomi a moment of silent, profound respect. Judge Eleanor Michaels, renowned for her motto, "Justice with no exceptions," ascended the bench. Her voice slammed down like a hammer. The trial of former Captain Morgan Caldwell is now in session. The prosecutor presented a mountain of evidence of passenger video recordings, reports from security personnel, testimonies from eyewitnesses aboard the flight, internal communications from flight operations. Each piece of evidence pierced through the feeble defense like arrows through paper. In his closing statement, the prosecutor declared, "Striking a passenger based solely on skin color is not merely an act of violence. It is the ugliest manifestation of corrupted power. Today, we are not merely trying an individual, we are trying a system, an attitude, and a culture of silent complicity." Judge Michaels didn't deliberate for long. She slammed her gavel. "Morgan Caldwell, the court sentences you to 6-month suspended sentence, 300 hours of community service with minority and immigrant communities, permanent revocation of your pilot's license, permanent ban from all commercial aviation activities. This case is closed. Justice is served." No one clapped inside the courtroom, but everyone exhaled, as if witnessing a festering wound finally and cleanly cut away. Justice today was no longer a slogan. It was real, vivid, shining, and merciless. At the same time, at Sovereign Airlines headquarters, CEO Gregory Stanton held a nationwide press conference. Standing before hundreds of cameras and millions watching via livestream, he bowed deeply and offered a public apology. "On behalf of Sovereign Airlines, I offer my deepest apologies to Chief Naomi Carter and to every community we have wronged. We acknowledge our grave mistakes, and we commit to change, no excuses, no evasions." Gregory Stanton announced an immediate reform plan: the establishment of a $50 million Justice and Equity Fund, mandatory anti-discrimination training for 100% of employees, deployment of an independent internal monitoring and customer feedback system, a commitment to diverse hiring and advancement based solely on merit. In an exclusive interview afterward, Naomi Carter spoke calmly. "This is not my victory. This is a victory for every child who was ever told, 'This place isn't for you.' From today forward, every space belongs to all of us." 1 month after the historic trial, the American aviation industry, once a seemingly immovable giant, suddenly began to shift. Major and minor airlines alike, from long-established giants like Transatlantic Airlines and Skybridge Aviation, to younger companies like Liberty Wings, simultaneously launched a full review of all personnel with a special focus on customer-facing positions, urgent implementation of mandatory training on racial discrimination, unconscious bias, and fair conflict resolution, installation of anonymous feedback systems allowing passengers and employees to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. Across airport bulletin boards, a new, bold declaration was posted, as if chiseled into stone: "Every passenger deserves respect. No discrimination, no exceptions, no tolerance." The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, issued an emergency directive: mandatory continuous video recording of check-in areas, boarding gates, and first-class cabins on all domestic flights. Airlines with high racial discrimination complaints would face temporary operating suspensions if improvements weren't made, permanent disqualification for aviation employees found guilty of serious discriminatory behavior. On social media, the hashtag number justice for all passengers spread like wildfire. Buried stories of discrimination at airports and on airplanes were now being told, shared, and receiving unprecedented attention. Minority communities formed tighter networks, establishing organizations dedicated to monitoring passenger rights. Flight schools and cabin crew academies also transformed. New curriculum modules were introduced. Equity in service authority, combating unconscious racial bias. New generations of aviation students were taught from day one. Power is not for imposing, power is for serving, equally for everyone. Naomi Carter, without seeking it, became a living symbol. She didn't go on speaking tours. She didn't exploit her fame. Instead, she quietly took the most impactful actions, helping design human rights training programs for the entire aviation industry, contributing to the development of internal whistleblower protection systems, supporting other victims in seeking the justice they once feared to demand. CEO Gregory Stanton of Sovereign Airlines didn't sit idle either. He organized public conferences, inviting representatives from every community, people of color, immigrants, the LGBTQ+ community, people with disabilities, to sit in the front row, to listen, to critique, and to contribute. Sovereign Airlines, once cursed and condemned, gradually became a model of reform, leading the new movement toward a fair aviation industry. One major newspaper headlined, "America's skies are changing color, not just skin deep, but equity etched into the heart." And all of this began from one day, one woman, one first-class ticket, and one slap that the whole world would never forget. 1 year later, warm sunlight bathed metropolitan city's central square, where thousands had gathered for an unprecedented event. The honoring of Naomi Carter, the woman who shook an entire system to its core. On the grand stage, a silver-winged emblem, the new symbol of justice in aviation, soared against the clear blue sky. Below it, from high-ranking officials to everyday citizens who had once suffered in silence, all eyes were drawn to the woman slowly ascending the podium. No uniform, no medals, just Naomi. Simple yet shining brighter than any decoration. She smiled, her deep-set eyes, which had witnessed so much injustice, so many silent battles, now glowing with a hope that could not be extinguished. Behind Naomi, a large banner unfurled, revealing the words, "Naomi Carter, the woman who turned one slap into a revolution for justice." Patrick Simmons, now Vice President of Sovereign Airlines, spoke with emotion thick in his voice. She didn't just change an airline, she changed the thinking of an entire generation. From today forward, whispered discrimination, contemptuous glances will find no place to survive. Naomi stepped up to the microphone, her voice warm and steady. No shouting needed to command the square's silence. "I am not a victim. I am not a hero. I am simply someone who chose not to stay silent. And I stand here today to say to all of you, when injustice happens before your eyes, you have two choices. Turn away, pretending not to see, or stand up, even if it's with a single question. Why is this happening?" One small action, one simple voice, can change an entire rotten system. The applause thundered like a storm, echoing through the streets, the glass towers around the square reflecting the image of Naomi Carter, standing proud, like a beacon lighting the way for millions. Naomi's story was soon incorporated into curricula at aviation academies, security training centers, and even corporate leadership programs. A new generation grew up learning. Justice does not arrive by itself. Fairness does not exist by default. Each person must create it through action, courage, and relentless persistence. Final scene. Across the square, a young black girl, about 8 years old, gazed up at Naomi with wide, reverent eyes. She tugged on her mother's hand and asked, "Mommy, can I be like her when I grow up?" The mother smiled radiantly, her eyes glistening with pride. "Not only can you, baby, you will, and you will go even further." Naomi Carter had planted the seed. Now an entire forest of justice was beginning to grow. Justice is not a gift handed down by those in power. Justice is the triumph of those who dare to rise, even when facing corrupted authority. Naomi Carter didn't change the world with fists or fury, she changed it with steadfastness, resilience, and truth. If you believe that fairness belongs to everyone, regardless of skin color, background, or status,